Every time I sing this number, I find myself doing the old-fashioned cakewalk. Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime pal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own. Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime pal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own.
Hello, Kat. It's been a while since we read this story, and we've skipped ahead a bit, so I gave you a synopsis of the plot up to this point. Bertie Wooster and Gussie Finknottle, his drippy friend, swap their identities, while Catsmeat Potter Purbright pretends to be the faux Gussie's valet Meadows, and Jeeves pretends to be the faux Bertie's valet, before complications ensue. Together, they find themselves at the aunt-ridden Deverell Hall, Hampshire, seat of the imposing Dame Daphne Winkworth, where Gussie's on-off engagement to Madeline Bassett is once again in danger, leaving Bertie at risk of becoming reattached to her. Bertie must also defend his friend Catsmeat's girl Gertrude Winkworth, daughter of Dame Daphne, from the attentions of the attractive Esmond Haddock, while avoiding fulfilling his Aunt Agatha's wish that he marry her himself. All of Jeeves's considerable powers are required to bring things to a satisfactory conclusion. When we last left off, Bertie had snuck into the house where Madeline Bassett was staying with her friend to steal a letter that Gussie had sent her, telling her that he was breaking it off because he was in love with Catsmeat's sister, and Bertie could not allow this to happen, so he broke in to steal the letter and then was discovered hiding behind a couch in the sitting room. And so we begin with Chapter 17. At this point, he's just been caught. The proceedings opened with one of those long, sticky silences which give you the same unpleasant feeling you get when you let them rope you into play Bulstrode a Butler in amateur theatricals, and you go on and find you have forgotten your opening lines. She was standing gazing at me, as if I had been a photographer about to squeeze the bulb and take a studio portrait in sepia and silver-gray wash, and after a while it seemed to me that it was about time one of us said something. The great thing on these occasions is to get the conversation going. "A nice day," I said. I thought I'd look in." She enlarged the eyes a bit, but did not utter, so I proceeded. "It occurred to me that you might be glad to have the latest bulletin about Gussie, so I popped up on the milk train. Gussie, I'm glad to say, is getting along fine. The wrist is still stiff, but the swelling is subsiding and there is no pain. He sends his best." She remained sotto voce and the silent tomb, and I carried on. I thought a word or two touching upon my recent activities might now be in order. I mean, you can't just come bounding up from behind the furniture and let it go at that. You have to explain and clarify your motives. Girls like to know these things. "You are probably asking yourself," I said, "what I was doing behind that sofa. I parked myself there on a sudden whim. You know how one gets these sudden whims. And you may be thinking it a bit odd that I should be going around with this studio portrait in my possession. Well, I'll tell you. I happened to see it on the table there, and I took it to give to Gussie. I thought he would like to have it, to buck him up in your absence. He misses you sorely, of course, and it occurred to me that it would be nice for him to shove it on the dressing table and study it from time to time. No doubt he already has several of these speaking likenesses, but a fellow can always do with one more." "Not too bad," it seemed to me, considering that the material had had to be thrown together rather against time, and I was hoping for the bright smile and the cordial, "Why, yes, to be sure, a capital idea." Instead of which, she waggled her head in a slow, mournful sort of way, and a teardrop stood in her eye. "Oh, Bertie," she said. I have always found it difficult to think of just the right comeback when people say, "Oh, Bertie," to me. My Aunt Agatha is always doing it, and she has me stymied every time. I found myself stymied now. It is true that this "Oh, Bertie" of the Bassets differed in many respects from Aunt Agatha's "Oh, Bertie," its tone being one of soupiness rather than asperity, but the effect was the same. I stood there at a loss. "Oh, Bertie," she said again. "Do you read Rosie M. Banks's novels?" she asked. I was a bit surprised at her changing the subject like this, but equally relieved. Talk about current literature, I felt, might ease the strain. These booksy chats often do. Not very frequently," I said. They sell like hotcakes, Bingo tells me." "You have not read Mervyn Keene, Clubman?" "No, I missed that. Good stuff?" "It is very, very beautiful." "Ah, I must put it on my library list." "You are sure you have not read it?" Quite. As a matter of fact, I've always steered rather clear of Mrs. Bingo's stuff. Why?" "It seems such an extraordinary coincidence. Shall I tell you the story of Mervyn Keene?" "Do." She took time out to gulp a bit. Then she carried on in a low voice with a goodish amount of throb to it. "He was young and rich and handsome, an officer in the Coldstream Guards, and the idol of all who knew him. Everybody envied him." "Oh, I don't wonder. A lucky stiff." "But he was not really to be envied. There was a tragedy in his life. He loved Cynthia Grey, the most beautiful girl in London, but just as he was about to speak his love, he found that she was engaged to Sir Hector Malververer, the explorer." "Ah, dangerous devils, these explorers. You want to watch them like hawks. In these cirques, of course, he would have refrained from speaking his love, kept it under his hat, I suppose, what?" "Yes, he spoke no word of love, but he went on worshipping her, outwardly gay and cheerful, inwardly gnawed by a ceaseless pain. And then one night her brother Lionel, a wild young man who had unfortunately got into bad company, came to his rooms and told him that he had committed a very serious crime and was going to be arrested, and he asked Mervyn to save him by taking the blame himself. And of course Mervyn said he would." "The silly ass! Why?" "For Cynthia's sake. To save her brother from imprisonment and shame." "Oh, but it meant going to Chokey himself. I suppose he overlooked that?" "No. Mervyn fully realized what must happen, but he confessed to the crime and went to prison. When he came out, grey and broken, he found that Cynthia had married Sir Hector, and he went out to the South Sea Islands and became a beachcomber. And time passed. And then one day Cynthia and her husband arrived at the island on their travels and stayed at Government House, and Mervyn saw her drive by, and she was just as beautiful as ever. And their eyes met, but she didn't recognize him, because of course he had a beard and his face was changed, and he had been living the pace that kills, trying to forget." I remembered a good one I had read somewhere about the pace that kills nowadays being the slow, casual walk across a busy street, but I felt this was not the moment to spring it. "He found out that she was leaving next morning, and he had nothing to remember her by. So he broke into Government House in the night and took from her dressing table the rose she had been wearing in her hair. And Cynthia found him taking it, and of course she was very upset when she recognized him." "Ah, well, she recognized him this time. He'd shaved, had he?" "No, he still wore his beard, but she knew him when he spoke her name. And there was a very powerful scene in which he told her how he had always loved her and had come to steal her rose, and she told him that her brother had died and confessed on his deathbed that it was he who had been guilty of the crime for which Mervyn had gone to prison. And then Sir Hector came in." "Oh, good situation. Strong." And of course he thought Mervyn was a burglar, and he shot him, and Mervyn died with the rose in his hand. And of course the sound of the shot roused the house, and the governor came running in and said, 'Is anything missing?' And Cynthia, in a low, almost inaudible voice, said, 'Only a rose.' That is the story of Mervyn Keene, clubman." Well, it was difficult, of course, to know quite what comment to make. I said, "Oh, but I felt at the time that it could have been improved on. The fact is, I was feeling a bit stunned. I had always known in a sort of vague, general way that Mrs. Bingo wrote the world's worst tripe. Bingo generally changes the subject nervously if anyone mentions the little woman's output, but I had never supposed her capable of builds like this. But the Basset speedily took my mind off literary criticism. She had resumed her saucer-like stare, and the teardrop in the eye was now more noticeable than ever. "Oh, Bertie," she said, and her voice, like Cynthia's, was low and almost inaudible. "I ought to have given you my photograph long ago. I blame myself. But I thought it would be too painful for you, too sad a reminder of all that you had lost. I see now that I was wrong. You found the strain too great to bear. At all costs you had to have it. So you stole into the house like Mervyn Keene and took it." "What?" "Yes, Bertie. There need be no pretenses between you and me. And don't think I am angry. I am touched, more deeply touched than I can say, and oh, so sorry. How sad life is." I was with her there. "You betcha," I said. "You saw my friend Hilda Gudgeon. There is another tragedy. Her whole happiness has been ruined by a wretched quarrel with the man she loves, a man called Harold Anstruther. They were playing in the mixed doubles in a tennis tournament not long ago, and according to her, I don't understand tennis very well, he insisted on hogging the game, as she calls it. I think she means that when the ball came near and she was going to strike it, he rushed across and struck it himself, and this annoyed her very much. She complained to him, and he was very rude, and said she was a rabbit and had better leave everything to him, and she broke off the engagement directly the game was finished. And now she is broken-hearted." I must say she didn't sound very broken-hearted. Just as the Basset said these words, there came from without the uproar of someone singing, and I identified the voice as that of the solid school friend. She was rendering that old number, "Give yourself a pat on the back," and the general effect was of an exhilarated foghorn. The next moment she came leaping into the room, and I have never seen anything more radiant. If she hadn't had the white woolly dog in her arms, I wouldn't have recognized the somber female of so short a time ago. "Hi, Madeline," she cried. "What do you think I found on the breakfast table? A grovelling letter from the boyfriend, no less. He surrendered unconditionally. He says he must have been mad to call me a rabbit. He says he can never forgive himself, but can I forgive him? Well, I can answer that one. I'm going to forgive him the day after tomorrow. Not earlier, because we must have discipline." "Oh, Hilda, how glad I am." "I'm pretty pleased about it myself. A good old Harold, a king among men, but of course needs keeping in his place from time to time, and has to be taught what's what. But I mustn't run on about Harold. What I came to tell you was that there's a fellow outside in a car who says he wants to see you." "To see me?" "So he says. Name of Pirbright." Madeline turned to me. "Why, it must be your friend Claude Pirbright, Bertie. I wonder what he wants. I'd better go and see." She threw a quick glance at the solid girl, and seeing that she had stepped through the French window, no doubt to give the gardener the devil about something, came to me and pressed my hand. "You must be brave, Bertie," she said in a low, roopy voice. "Some day another girl will come into your life, and you will be happy. When we are both old and grey, we shall laugh together over all this. Laugh, but I think with a tear behind the smile." She popped off, leaving me feeling sick. The solid girl, whom I had dimly heard telling the gardener he needn't be afraid of breaking that spade by leaning on it, came back and immediately proceeded, in which I considered an offensively familiar manner, to give me a hearty slap on the back. "Well, Worcester, old bloke," she said. "Well, gudgeon, old bird," I replied courteously. "Do you know, Worcester, I keep feeling there's something familiar about your name. I must have heard Harold mention it. Do you know Harold Anstruther?" I had recognized the name directly I heard Madeline Bassett utter it. Beefy Anstruther had been my partner at rackets my last year at Oxford, when I had represented the establishment at that sport. I revealed this to the solid girl, and she slapped my back again. "I thought I wasn't wrong. Harold speaks very highly of you, Worcester, old-timer, and I'll tell you something. I have a lot of influence with Madeline, and I'll exert it on your behalf. I'll talk to her like a mother. Dash it all, we can't have her marrying a pill like Gussie Finknottle, when there's a rackets blue on her waiting list. Courage, Worcester, old cock, courage and patience. I'll come and have a bit of breakfast." Thanks, awfully no," I said, though I needed it sorely. "I must be getting along." "Well, if you won't, you won't, but I will. I'm going to have the breakfast of a lifetime. I haven't felt so roaring fit since I won the tennis singles at Rodine." I had braced myself for another slap on the back, but with a swift change of policy, she prodded me in the ribs, depriving me of what little breath her frightful words had left inside me. At the thought of what might result from a girl of her dominating personality talking to Madeline Bassett like a mother, I had wilted where I stood. It was with what are called leaden steps that I passed through the French window and made my way to the road. I was anxious to intercept Catsmeat when he drove out, so that I might learn from him the results of his interview. And of course, when he did drive out, he was herring along at such a pace that it was impossible to draw myself to his attention. He vanished over the skyline as if he had been competing in some event at Brooklands, leaving me standing. In sombre mood, bowed down with dark forebodings, I went off to get a bit of breakfast and catch a train back to King's Deverill. Chapter 18. The blokes who run the railway don't make it easy for you to get from Wimbledon to King's Deverill, feeling no doubt, and I suppose it's a kindly thought, that abode of thugs and ghouls is a place you're better away from. You change twice before you get to Basingstoke, and then change again and take the branch line. And once you're on the branch line, it's quicker to walk. The first person I saw when I finally tottered out at journey's end, feeling as if I had been glued to the cushioned seat since early boyhood, and a bit surprised that I hadn't put out tendrils like a Virginia creeper, was my cousin Thomas. He was buying motion picture magazines at the bookstall. "Oh, hello," I said. "So you got here all right?" He eyed me coldly and said, "Crumbs," a word of which he is far too fond. This toss is one of those tough, hard-boiled striplings, a sort of juvenile James Cagney with a touch of Edward G. Robinson. He has carroty hair and a cynical expression, and his manner is supercilious. You would think that anyone conscious of having a mother like my Aunt Agatha, and knowing it could be proved against him, would be crushed and apologetic. But this is not the case. He swanks about the place as if he bought it, and in conversation with a cousin lacks tact and is apt to verge on the personal. He became personal now on the subject of my appearance, which I must confess was not spruce. Night travel in milk trains always tends to remove the gloss, and you can't hobnob with beetles and bushes and remain dapper. "Crumbs," he said. "You look like something the cat brought in." You see what I mean? The wrong note. In no frame of mind to bandy words, I clouted the child moodily on the head and passed on. And as I emerged into the station yard, somebody yoo-hooed, and I saw Corky sitting in her car. "Hello, Bertie," she said. "Where did you spring from, moon of my delight?" She looked about her in a wary and conspiratorial manner, as if she had been registering sneakiness in a spy film. "Did you see what was in the station?" she asked, lowering the voice. "I did." "Jeeves delivered him as per memo last night. Uncle Sidney looked a little taken aback for a moment, and seemed as if he were on the point of saying some of the things he gave up saying when he took orders, But everything has turned out for the best. He loves his game of chess, and it seems that Thomas is the undisputed champion of his school, brimming over with gambits and openings and things, so they get along fine, and I love him. What a sympathetic, sweet-natured boy he is, Bertie. I blinked. You are speaking of my cousin Thomas? He's so loyal. When I told him about the heel Dobbs arresting Sam Goldwyn, he simply boiled with generous indignation. He says he's going to cosh him. To what him? It's something people do to people in detective stories. You use a small but serviceable rubber bludgeon. He hasn't got a small but serviceable rubber bludgeon. Oh, yes, he has. He bought it in 7 Dials when he was staying in your flat. His original idea was to employ it on a boy called Stinker at Bramley-on-Sea, but it is now earmarked for Dobbs. Oh, my God! It will do Dobbs all the good in the world to be coshed. It may prove a turning point in his life. I have a feeling that things are breaking just right these days, and that very shortly an era of universal happiness will set in. Look at Catsmeat if you want Exhibit A. Have you seen him? Not to speak to, I said, speaking in a distrait manner, for my mind was still occupied with Toss and his plans. The last thing you want when the nervous system is in a state of hash are your first cousins socking policemen with rubber bludgeons. What about Catsmeat? I met him just now, and he was singing like a linnet all over the place. He had a note from Gertrude last night, and she says that if and when she can elude her mother's eye, she will elope with him. His cup of joy is full. I'm glad someone's is. The somberness of my tone caused her to look sharply at me, and her eyes widened as she saw the disorder of my outer crust. Bertie, my lamb, she cried, visibly moved. What have you been doing to yourself? You look like something the cat brought in. I was going to say something excavated from Tutankhamun's tomb, but your guess is as good as mine. What's been happening? I passed a weary hand over the brow. Corky, I said, I've been through hell. About the only place I thought you didn't have to go through to get to King's Deverell. And how were they all? I have a frightful story to relate. Did somebody cosh you? I've just come from Wimbledon. From Wimbledon? Oh, but Catsmeat was attending to the Wimbledon end. He told me all about it. He didn't tell you all about it, because all about it is precisely what he doesn't know. If you've only heard Catsmeat's reminiscences, you simply aren't within 1,000,000 miles of being in possession of the facts. He barely scratched the surface of Wimbledon, whereas I... Would you care to have the ghastly details? She said she would love to, and I slipped them to her, and for once she listened attentively from start to finish, an agreeable deviation from her customary deaf-adder tactics. I found her a good audience. She was properly impressed when I spoke of Gussie's letter, nor did she omit to draw the breath in sharply as I touched on the gudgeon and the sinister affair of the studio portrait. The facts in connection with the white woolly dog also went over big. Golly, she said as I wore to a close. You do live, don't you, Bertie? I agreed that I lived, but expressed a doubt as to whether, the circumstances being what they were, it was worthwhile continuing to do so. One was rather inclined, I said, to murmur, Death, where is thy sting, and turn the toes up. The best one can say, I concluded, is that one has obtained a brief respite, if respite is the word, and that only if Catsmeat was successful in dissuading the Basset from her awful purpose. For all I know, she may be coming on the next train. No, she's not. He headed her off. You had that straight from the horse's mouth. Direct from his personal lips. I drew a deep breath. This certainly put a brighter aspect on the cloud wreck. In fact, it seemed to me that Hallelujah about summed it up, and I mentioned this. I was concerned to note that she appeared a bit dubious. Yes, I suppose Hallelujah sums it up, to a certain extent. I mean, you can make your mind easy about her coming here. She isn't coming. But in the light of what you tell me about Mervyn Keene Clubman and the studio portrait, it's a pity Catsmeat didn't hit on some other method of heading her off. I do feel that. My heart stood still. I clutched at the windscreen for support, and what did? The great thing to remember, the thing to bear in mind, and keep the attention fixed on, is that he meant well." My heart stood stiller. In your walks about London, you will sometimes see bent, haggard figures that look as if they had recently been caught in some powerful machinery. They are those of fellows who got mixed up with cat's meat when he was meaning well. What he told Miss Bassett was this. He said that on hearing that she was coming to the hall, you betrayed agitation and concern, and finally he got it out of you what the trouble was. Loving her hopelessly as you do, you shrank from the agony of having to see her day after day in Gussie's society. My heart, ceasing to stand still, gave a leap and tried to get out through my front teeth. He told Madeline Bassett that, I quavered, shaking on my stem. Yes, and implored her to stay away and not subject you to this anguish. He says he was terrific and wished 1 or 2 managers had been there to catch his work, and I think he must have been pretty good, because Miss Bassett cried buckets and said she quite understood and of course would cancel her visit, adding something in a low voice about the desire of the moth for the star and how sad life was. What did you say? I explained that I had not spoken, merely uttered one of those hollow groans, and she agreed that in the circus hollow groans were perhaps in order. But, of course, it wasn't easy for the poor angel to think of a good way of stopping her coming, she argued, and the great thing was to stop her somehow. True. So, if I were you, I would try to look on the bright side. Count your blessings one by one, if you know what I mean. This is an appeal which, when addressed to Bertram Wooster, rarely falls on deaf ears. The stunned sensation which her words had induced did not actually leave me, but it diminished somewhat in intensity. I saw her point. There is much in what you say, I agreed, rising on stepping stones of my dead self to higher things, as I have mentioned is my custom. The great thing, as you justly remark, was to stop the Bassett blowing in, and if that has been accomplished, one does wrong to be fussy about the actual mechanism. And, after all, she was already firmly convinced of my unswerving devotion, so cat's meat hasn't really plunged me so very much deeper in the broth than I was before. That's my brave little man. That's the way to talk. We now have a respite, and all depends on how quickly you can put Gussie on ice. The moment that is done, the whole situation will clarify. Released from your fatal spell, he will automatically return to the old love, feeling that the cagey thing to go is where he is appreciated. When do you expect to cool him off? Very soon. Why not instanter? Well, I'll tell you, Bertie. There's a little job I want him to do for me first. What job? Ah, here's Thomas at last. He seems to have bought every fan magazine in existence. To read at the concert, if he's sensible. You haven't forgotten the concert is this evening? Well, mind you don't. And when you see Jeeves, ask him how that clack of Esmond's has come out. Hop in, Thomas. Toss hopped in, giving me another of his supercilious looks, and when in, leaned across and slipped a penny into my hand, saying, "Here, my poor man," and urging me not to spend it on drink. At any other moment, this coarse ribaldry would have woken the fiend that sleeps in Bertram Wooster, and led to the young pot of poison receiving another clout on the head. But I had no time now for attending to tosses. I fixed Corky with a burning eye. What job? Oh, it wouldn't interest you, she said. Just a trivial little job about the place. And she drove off, leaving me a prey to a nameless fear. I was hoofing along the road that led to the hall, speculating dully as to what precisely she had meant by the expression trivial little job, when, as I rounded a corner, something large and Norfolk-coated hove in sight, and I identified it as Esmond Haddock. Owing to the fact, this is chapter 19, owing to the fact that on the instructions of Dame Daphne Safety First Winkworth, Port was no longer served after dinner, and the male and female members of the gang now left the table in a body at the conclusion of the evening repast. I had not enjoyed a tete-a-tete with Esmond Haddock since the night of my arrival. I had seen him around the place, of course, but always in the company of a brace of assorted aunts, or that of his cousin Gertrude, in each case looking Byronic. Checking up with Jeeves, I find that is the word, all right. Apparently it means looking like the late Lord Byron, who was a gloomy sort of bird, taking things the hard way. We came together, he approaching from the north-northeast, and I and self approaching from the south-southwest, and he greeted me with a moody twitch of the cheek muscles, as if he had thought of smiling, and then thought again, and said, "Oh, to hell with it." "Hello," he said. "Hello," I said. "A nice day," he said. "Yes," I said. "Out for a walk?" "Yes," he said. "Are you out for a walk?" Prudence compelled me to descend a subterfuge. "Yes," I said, "I'm out for a walk. I just ran into Miss Pirbright." At the mention of that name, he winced as if troubled by an old wound. "Oh," he said. "Miss Pirbright, eh?" He swallowed a couple of times. I could see a question trembling on his lips, but it was plainly one that nauseated him, for after uttering the word "was," he kept right along swallowing. I was just about to touch on the situation in the Balkans in order to keep the conversation going, when he got it out. "Was Worcester with her?" "No, she was alone." "You're sure?" "Certain." "He may have been lurking in the background, behind a tree or something." The meeting occurred in the station yard. "He wasn't skulking in a doorway?" "Oh, no." "Strange. You don't often see her without Worcester these days," he said, and ground his teeth a trifle. I had a shot at trying to mitigate his anguish, which I could see was considerable. He, too, had obviously noted Gussie's spotty work, and it was plain that what is technically known as the green-eyed monster had been slipping it across him properly. "Well, they're old friends, of course," I said. "Are they?" "Oh, rather. I should say they have known each other since childhood. They went to the same dancing class." The moment I had mentioned that, I was wishing I hadn't, for it seemed to affect him as though some hidden hand had given him the hot foot. You couldn't say his brow darkened, because it had been dark to start with, but he writhed visibly. Like Lord Byron reading a review of his last slim volume of verse and finding it a stinker. I wasn't surprised. A man in love and viewing with concern the competition of a rival does not like to think of the adored object and that rival pirouetting about together at dancing classes and probably splitting a sociable drink and biscuit in the 11 o'clock interval. "Oh," he said, and gave a sort of whistling sigh like the last whoosh of a dying soda-water siphon. The same dancing class, eh?" He brooded a while. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse and rumbling. "Tell me about this Worcester, Gussie. He is a friend of yours?" "Oh, yes." "Known him long?" "We were at school together." "I suppose he was a pretty loathsome boy, the pariah of the establishment?" "Oh, no." "Changed after he grew up, eh? Well, he certainly made up leeway all right, because all the slinking snakes it has ever been my misfortune to encounter, he is the slimiest." "Well, would you call him a slinking snake?" "I did call him a slinking snake, and I'll do it again as often as you wish. The fish-faced trailing arbutus." He's not a bad chap." "That may be your opinion. It is not mine, nor I should imagine that of most decent-minded people. Hell is full of men like Worcester. What the devil does she see in him?" "I don't know." "Nor anyone else. I've studied the fellow carefully and without bias, and he seems to me entirely lacking in charm. Have you ever turned over a flat stone?" "From time to time." And what came crawling out? A lot of obscene creatures that might have been his brothers. I tell you, Gussie, if you were to put a bit of gorgonzola cheese on the slide of a microscope and tell me to take a look, the first thing I'd say on getting it focused would be, "Oh, why, hello, Worcester." He brooded byronically for a moment. "I know the specious argument you are going to put forward, Gussie," he proceeded. "You are going to say that it is not Worcester's fault that he looks like a slightly enlarged cheese mite. Very true. One strives to be fair. But it is not only the man's revolting appearance that distresses the better element. He is a menace to the community." "Oh, come. What do you mean, oh, come? You heard what my Aunt Daphne was telling us at dinner the night you arrived. About this ghastly Worcester perpetually stealing policemen's helmets." "Not perpetually. Just as a treat on boat race night." He frowned. "I don't like the way you stick up for the fellow, Gussie. You probably consider that you are being broad-minded, but you want to be careful how you let that so-called broad-mindedness grow on you. It is apt to become mere moral myopia. The facts are well documented. Whenever Worcester has a spare moment, he goes about London persecuting unfortunate policemen, assaulting them, hampering them in their duties, making their lives a hell on earth. That's the kind of man Worcester is." He paused, and became for a moment lost in thought. Then here flitted across his map another of those quick twitches which he seemed to be using nowadays, on the just-as-good principle as a substitute for smiles. "Well, I'll tell you one thing, Gussie. I only hope he intends to start something on those lines here, because we're ready for him." "Eh?" "Ready and waiting. You know Dobbs?" "The flatty?" "Our village constable, yes. A splendid fellow, tireless in the performance of his duties." "I've not met him. I hear his engagement is broken off." "So much the better, for it will remove the last trace of pity and weakness from his heart. I've told Dobbs all about Worcester and warned him to be on the alert, and he is on the alert. He is straining at the leash. Let Worcester so much as lift a finger in the direction of Dobbs's helmet, and he's for it. You might not think so at a casual glance, Gussie, but I'm a justice of the peace. I sit on the bench at our local sessions, and put it across the criminal classes when they start getting above themselves. It is my earnest hope that the criminal streak in Worcester will come to the surface and cause him to break out, because in that event Dobbs will be on him like a leopard, and he will come up before me, and I shall give him 30 days without the option, regardless of his age or sex." I didn't like the sound of this. "You wouldn't do that, Esmond." "I would. I'm looking forward to it. Let Worcester stray 1 inch from the straight and narrow path, just 1 inch, and you can kiss him goodbye for 30 days. Well, I'll be moving along, Gussie. I find it helps a little to keep walking." He disappeared over the horizon at 5 miles per hour, and I stood there aghast. The sense of impending peril was stronger on the wing than ever. "Oh, that Jeeves were here," I said to myself. I found he was. For some little time past I had been conscious of some substance in the offing that was saying, "Good morning, sir," and turning to see where the noise was coming from, I beheld him at my side, looking bronzed and fit, as if his fit to Bramley-on-Sea had done him good. And we'll stop there for now. I hope you're feeling well, and I'll talk to you soon.